Le résumé est assez facile à faire. Le Bloc québécois a présenté des demandes qui ont été explicitement établies comme étant non négociables pour la suite des choses. Et elles ne se trouvent pas dans le budget de M. Champagne ou de M. Carney, qui tenait probablement pour beaucoup le crayon. Il n'y a pas de fin de cet héritage de Justin Trudeau en ce qui a trait à la discrimination infligée aux aînés. Comprenons-nous bien, là. Les retraités de 65 à 75 ans vont continuer à recevoir un chèque de pension de sécurité de la vieillesse moindre que ceux de 75 ans et plus. Et dans toutes les associations, même ces gens-là qui représentent les années de discrimination-là n'ont pas de bon sens. Le gouvernement se permet un déficit de 78 milliards et ne prend pas la peine de régler une injustice.
Deficit, but it's not going to resolve this injustice. And basically, it's trying to turn its back on some aspects of Trudeau's legacy, but it's still the same government. Now, the annual increase in health transfers must be able to cover the expenses that have to be covered by Quebec. And there again, we see a refusal by this government. So year after year, the Quebec government will continue to be unable to make the payment associated with increased costs for the healthcare system in Quebec, and that applies elsewhere as well. In terms of infrastructure, $75 billion, only $9 billion is actually new money. $9 billion over 5 years. What exactly do you expect to do with that when the needs are so huge?
Okay, that's Yves-François Blanchet, the leader of the Bloc Québécois. The reason we're dipping into all of these reactions, of course, is because this is a minority government, and the government's going to need at least 3 votes or 3 people who get the flu when that vote comes in a couple weeks' time. Certainly sounds like from the beginning of what Yves-François Blanchet is saying there is that the government didn't meet the 6 non-negotiable demands that the Bloc had put forward. We will wait to see whether he gives a definitive answer or whether he says he will look at it. Can tell you as well that the NDP has just put out a release, and we'll bring you some of their interim leader when he emerges, saying that this is a critical budget, it comes at a critical time, that the New Democrats understand that they were sent to Ottawa to work for workers and families. They will begin the work of judging whether it meets the needs of Canadians. There are measures that are welcome, says the NDP, that have been advocated for, but there are measures, he says, that are a step in the wrong direction. So the New Democrats are going to take some time and look at it and see whether or not they can support it. So at this stage, we don't know how this is going to go, but it does sound as though some people have some things to look at and consider. Let's bring in CBC's Peter Armstrong, senior business correspondent. Sort of keep you waiting. There's lots going on.
There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on. Give me your take on what this does to the business environment and sort of the fiscal picture of the country right now.
I think there's a couple of things. The environment that it comes from is still very perilous, and there's not a ton in this that addresses what happens if things get worse and not better. This offers a plan to how to get out of the mess we're in into a better place. That plan comes with a high degree of difficulty, and pulling it off is going to take both time and execution, neither of which we have in abundance. We don't have a ton of time, and we don't have a long history of governments, recently anyways, implementing some of these big, bold, ambitious plans that they've had. And so, you look at some of their tax programs where they're trying to incent businesses to spend more, build more, produce more. The manufacturing side of it, I think, is one of the most interesting ones where they've really ratcheted down the potential tax burden on manufacturers in this country, so long as they build more, do more, create more for Canadians, by Canadians, employ Canadians. But as I say, the degree of difficulty in that is enormous, and the margin for error is incredibly small. Things could very easily get worse and not better. And there's not a ton in this budget that lays out precisely what they'll do for Canadian businesses, Canadian workers, if indeed things do get worse, not better. You have economists like Armin Yalnizyan that have been banging the drum for years now, but really in the last couple of months leading up to this, saying we need to have a better plan for helping workers now. We're going to get GDP numbers this month that will tell us that whether or not Canada actually slipped into a recession this summer or not, this plan is going to help the Canadian economy in 5 years, 3, 4 years. The problem is what happens right now, and can those two, can one crossfade as the other sort of comes up? That's going to be difficult to pull off.
As David was saying, though, is the idea to create an environment that is even more attractive than the United States and more competitive in terms of a place to stay here so that we don't lose business?
Yeah, so you go through, like, not to get too deep in the weeds, but it's budget day, so let's get into the weeds. The marginal effective tax rate is what we're looking at here. And they've tried to sort of bring it down through different measures for every sector. There's a chart that just shows every sector across the economy. And then if you zero in on manufacturing, it goes from, I can't remember the exact number, David,
8.2 down to
0.4 to 0.4%. Effectively saying, if you build anything. If you buy a land and then put a building on it and then fill it full of equipment, you can write that off at 100%, and you can write it off at 100% right now. The equivalent in the United States, I think, is 12%.
12.1. And actually, I lied. It's 8.6. It goes down from 8.6, so it's even bigger.
So
right?
These are sweeping changes that I haven't had a chance to talk to many Canadian manufacturers about this particular yet. I think they will be really excited by that prospect. I think they will have concerns, again, about the implementation and about a lot of the money that's in this is Trudeau announced money, and rolling that over sounds easy, and you can write that down in a plan and put it in a budget. It makes sense. Actually converting it can get tricky.
But the other big challenge on the tax incentive, which the minister said when he spoke to reporters inside the lockup was, we want to make Canada the most competitive country on earth, and we want to remove the uncertainty for businesses looking to invest. Canada's done what it can, and it may be more competitive than the U.S., except for the tariff wall. And except for whatever Donald Trump is willing to do to target your sector and the lack of a final deal on even the sectoral tariffs, let alone CUSMA. So that uncertainty isn't more powerful than the incentive of the tax
and
deductions.
It doesn't sound like that gets us to some overwhelming GDP growth projections.
No, that's exactly
either,
the point, right? That even with all of this, even once you factor in all of this spending, you're looking at like pretty sluggish 1%, 1.2% growth.
Keeps us out of a recession.
Keeps us out of recession, hopefully. And if it works, but as I say, high degree of difficulty, low margin of error.
It buys time.
Which is really important.
Really, that's the key thing. 100%. It's buying time to get to the midterm elections, to build a foundation from which you can do an economic pivot, open up the trade corridors, get the major project offices going. But it's all got to work in succession. And I got to say, Don Farrell, Rosie, at the major projects office out in Calgary, no pressure, but there's pressure because these are the projects that can really move the needle on GDP because of what's happening in the key sectoral areas. That needs to deliver. That needs to work, or it's a key pillar of this plan.
And David, if I may, the importance of getting these early projects done isn't just about saying these are the kinds of projects we're doing. This is messaging to the rest of the world and to the rest of the Canadian industry that we're back into business. And so they've got to get those done quick.
Okay, I want to bring in a little bit of the political reaction. Pierre Poilievre will be reacting inside the House of Commons, not doing a scrum, but he has already tweeted saying Mark Carney nearly doubled Trudeau's deficit and kept Liberal taxes on groceries, work, energy, home building. Conservatives will continue fighting for affordable lives for Canadians. They call this progress. We call it what it is, says Poilievre, a decline. How much more will they ask Canadians to sacrifice in this costly Liberal budget? Enough decline, enough sacrifice, bring an affordable budget, I think is the word missing there. So that doesn't sound like a fellow who was going to support the budget, though I'm not sure we expected that anyway. We'll see what he says inside the House of Commons. David, I want to bring you back just to talk about this infrastructure fund, which we've been talking about because it came out in the Globe this morning and we confirmed it, but we didn't really have any of the details. How will it work? Who's going to have access to this money? Yeah, so there's a series of funds, some of them old, some of them new. There's $115 billion in total in infrastructure, and you can find the details on page 102. The new one is a $51 billion Community Strong Fund. Build Community Strong Fund is what it's being called. It's to be administered by the Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Department, and essentially it's $51 billion over 10 years, starting in 26-27, and then $3 billion a year after that. And it's going to go to provincial and territorial governments and through them to municipalities to just support a whole range of infrastructure and local community projects. But a lot of this comes with a catch because it breaks down into a couple of streams. There's a provincial and territorial stream. It'll support housing enabling infrastructure, roads, water, wastewater, health-related infrastructure, houses, and infrastructure of colleges and university. And to access funds
provinces and territories must agree to cost match the federal funding, so it's not free money, premiers, and to substantially reduce development charges and not levy other taxes that hinder the housing supply. So it's a bit like the housing accelerator, but it exists as a baseline annual infrastructure fund. That to tap into this, you need to get the money, you have to agree not to raise any of the housing charges that get in the way. Now,
but you also have to match it.
You have to match it. Okay. So say you want $2 billion here in Ontario, Doug Ford's got to come up with $2 billion, and everywhere you go where that money is going to be used, they have to agree not to raise development charges to offset that burden and not to like raise other taxes that would hinder the supply of housing. Because when you're spending $25 billion to try to boost the housing supply, curbing immigration substantially to reduce the pressure on the housing supply, you can't have the lower orders of government who have been calling for money and federal action, then gumming it up with detrimental action or inaction and a lack of cash. Now, there is a bit of a carve-out for this. There's $5 billion over 3 years for health infrastructure. This is hospitals, emergency rooms, urgent care centers, medical schools. You don't have to tick any boxes on development charges to get that. You need to build out an emergency room in a growing town.
But do you have to match with that promise as well, or you don't know?
It says, recognizing the critical need to strengthen health infrastructure, the requirement related to development charges and other taxes noted above will not apply to this fund. Okay. So yes, you have to match, but you don't have to commit to not raise development fees and these sorts of things. So there's a blend of it, but you can see this all adds up to about $280 billion in infrastructure and capital investment that they're putting in here. Like there's $80 billion for defense, $30 billion of it is capital. Some of that's going to be dual purpose in the north, roads, for example, to get to a military base, could also be part of the passageway to a mining site or to a critical mineral facility. They're hoping all of this unlocks a bunch of domestic capital. $1 trillion is the number they set on it. The business experts we talked to in the briefing, Randall Bartlett, for example, with Desjardins, they're skeptical that it's going to unlock this much. I think it could have been even more ambitious here.
Okay, just to bring people up to date on where we are, the finance minister is still delivering his speech inside the House of Commons there and getting more details. Pierre Poilievre will also respond inside the House of Commons, but we already have some response from him over Twitter. He says that Mark Carney has doubled Trudeau's deficit. Conservatives will continue fighting for affordable lives for Canadians. So I guess he will consider what's there, but it doesn't sound to me like the Conservatives are going to support this.
And just to update on what's happening with the Bloc Québécois, Mr. Blanchette, according to his office, says he'll meet with the caucus tonight, but he doesn't see how they can vote in favor of the budget because their 6 demands were not met. Okay. So we have some skepticism here.
Liz May, the leader of the Green Party, says she will vote no unless the government's willing to negotiate on some of the environmental measures. And the NDP says it understands it's here to work for Canadians. It's going to look at the document and will consider what to do next. Okay, I want to bring in at issue to discuss some of the politics behind the budget and what they're seeing so far. Chantal Hébert, and from the lockup at Old City Hall, Andrew Coyne and Althea Raj. Good to see you all. Thank you for being here. Althea, let me start with you. What do you make of what you've been reading today and whether it delivers on what the Prime Minister promised?
I think a lot of people who were looking for that generational style investment will be disappointed. I think what it does show, though, is that Mark Carney has clearly yet again turned the page away from Justin Trudeau. You know, we're just a stone throws away from where Justin Trudeau was 10 years ago, just after being sworn in as Prime Minister. He went to Foreign Affairs next door and was greeted to loud cheers from public servants who were so happy that Stephen Harper was gone and the cuts that he had brought into international development and the bureaucracy, that was over. Statistics Canada fighting was over. And here we have a budget with actually deeper cuts to the public service than Stephen Harper, cuts to international development, even some nods to reducing the frequency and the quality of the data at Statistics Canada. So I don't know if that was purposeful or not, but the parallels obviously are drawn there. What's interesting to me politically is you can see this budget as nothing here that the opposition can support, and you can easily read this budget as nothing in here that the opposition can support.
Andrew, you're in the lockup too. What do you take away from it?
A little different. I mean, after all the hype about transformational this and generational that, What you got is a pretty conventional liberal budget. There's oceans of new spending in this year. They're actually going to spend more than the Trudeau government at its height. They're going to borrow more than the Trudeau government at its height. The deficits are going to be twice as large as in the last Trudeau budget. It's true that they're going to call a lot of it capital spending, which we used to just call spending. Okay, fine. Maybe some of that's useful and good. It's on the, they were going to spend less to invest more. It's on the spend less side that they really fall down. That comprehensive expenditure review that was so ballyhooed before the event, in the end came in at 3 years from now, they'll spend $13 billion less than they otherwise would on a budget of $500 billion. So 2.5% cuts in spending. That is not transformational. That is not a shift in spending. That's just a lot of new spending with some cuts to make room for it. The really disappointing thing is on the growth side. We're facing a growth crisis. We were even before Donald Trump came along. There's very little in here to spur growth. They've repackaged some pre-existing tax changes where they're going to allow accelerated expensing. A couple of new things added on, maybe some tweaks on competition measures, but it's really, really small beer stuff.
Chantal, you're watching from Montreal. It doesn't sound, at this stage anyway, as though the budget has the support from anyone, but the NDP is certainly considering things.
Yeah, well, first I want to go back to Andrew's point about the height. I don't think that I can think back to a budget that was so overhyped ahead of time as this budget. And the reality is, maybe it's from rookies in the PMO, failure at comms, but the way to do it usually is you underpromise and you overdeliver. This budget was overpromised and underdelivered in many ways, and you're kind of stuck with a gap between the rhetoric of the government about how transformational it is and the reality. And talking about the cuts in spending, I'm not saying you should take a hatchet to jobs, but if that small percentage is if you get to it. There's no guarantee that it's going to work. As for the politics of it, it is not the budget of a government that is looking to the NDP or the Bloc Québécois or the Green Party to support. There is nothing in there that will make it easier for the NDP to justify that it will support the budget. The cuts to the public service are real enough for the NDP to struggle its way to saying no. And it may be easier for the Conservatives to support, but I suspect that they won't. Every line that kind of corresponds to an opposition demand deficit at $42 billion, it was never going to happen, but it's not. The Bloc's request, the NDP's take on civil servants and unions, all of that seems more designed to give them a reason to vote no than to vote yes.
I mean, it seems from what you're saying and from what David's been telling me as I catch up, it seems as though it's a budget that doesn't quite do everything the government laid out, but maybe isn't so bad that it can't survive a budget vote. Is that fair to say, Althea?
Well, I don't know. I mean, to Chantal's point, I think it's really hard to see where the progressive parties find a win in this. Like, it kind of looks like a Harper government budget, except with a lot larger numbers and much more direct funding of, like, a strategic fund on for critical minerals. I like the heavy hand of government trying to do the industrial strategy, the defense procurement, a new defense strategy. We are basically acknowledging in this budget that there's not going to be a cap on oil and gas, so Elizabeth May is not going to be happy. There's no, tangible little popular gimmick. It's not drafted like a budget that the Liberals want to go to an election on. It is drafted like a technocratic budget that is intended to be a budget that somebody who wants to govern for a while has presented. But who's going to support it? And maybe you have people like Chris D'Entremont and other MPs who will cross the floor and give the government the votes. But if not, some people are going to have to swallow a heavy pill if they don't want to have an election.
30 seconds to you, Andrew, and then Chantal.
The budget removes some of the irritants that are causing some voters to bleed to the Conservatives from the Liberals. But the NDP is not going to provoke an election. They will find a way to not vote on this. They may not vote for it, but they cannot afford an election at this point.
Chantal, 30 seconds to you.
Okay, so Mark Carney's problem is going to be, if Andrew is right, and he may well be, that he will be facing 3+1 opposition parties that are basically saying they don't support the budget, even if they don't walk the talk of not supporting the budget. But that does have consequences going forward.
Right.
Because the government, if it wants to implement those plans, will need allies. And so it will be flying. And I agree with Althea. I'm not sure that it would be a very exciting platform to run on if you were a Liberal.
Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj, we will see you all later on The National. Thank you for your first take, though. Appreciate it very much. Let's bring back David Cochrane for a final thought.
Well, it's interesting. The cuts may be too big for the New Democrats to support on a budget vote, especially if you're Heather McPherson and you're seeking the leadership. Getting that caucus to do something in a united way on a budget like this is going to be difficult to pull off. The Conservatives, the deficit is probably too high. For them to vote for it. So Chris D'Entremont and friends on line 1, 2, and 3. I spoke to Chris D'Entremont the other night, and he made it clear to me. He said, people in the Atlantic Canada, certainly in Nova Scotia, where he is from, and it's D'Entremont, by the way, we're going to need to say that name a lot in the next couple of days. They don't want an election. He doesn't want an election. He was deciding whether or not he's going to vote for the budget. He said he would make a decision by Thursday. He is not in his chair in the House of Commons right now. Neither is Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. The Politico article has put the cat amongst the pigeons on Parliament Hill, I would suspect. So we could get some clarity on that pretty soon.
All right, David will be back in just mere moments with a special edition of Power and Politics, where he will speak with the finance minister. I will be back on The National a little bit later with a special at issue and also an interview with the finance minister. You're going to see a lot of him everywhere in the next couple of days. He is the man of the hour, as it were, but more analysis and coverage of budget, federal budget 2025 continues on Power and Politics with David Cochrane up next. I'm Rosemary Barton on behalf of myself and the whole team here. Hope that helped you understand. We'll keep digging into the details to bring you more coverage and analysis in the hours and days ahead. Thank you so much for watching. Power and Politics up next.